What if the story you think you know is only the version that survived? Not the truth, not the lie, just the version that made it through lawyers, palace walls, media filters, and time. But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. Because here's the uncomfortable reality no one likes to say out loud. The most powerful stories in the world don't disappear. They get rewritten. And sometimes, years later, they come back wearing different clothes. Different voices, different villains, different victims, but the same shadows. Tonight's story lives in those shadows. It is a story built on allegations, rumors, sworn testimony, media silence, and cultural obsession. A story that sits at the intersection of royalty, celebrity, money, and power. A story that people whisper about online, argue over in comment sections, and aggressively avoid discussing in polite company. And it begins with a question that makes people deeply uncomfortable. What happens when fame collides with power and no one is really innocent? This is not a courtroom. This is not a verdict. This is not a declaration of guilt. This is an examination of narratives, of claims, of why certain names keep resurfacing together again and again, long after the parties involved insist the past is buried. Because one name, in particular, refuses to stay buried. Ghislaine Maxwell. For years, she was described as many things. Socialite, connector, fixer, intellectual, heiress, friend to the powerful, invisible to the public, essential behind the scenes. And then suddenly, she wasn't invisible at all. She became a symbol, a lightning rod, a gatekeeper in a global scandal that shattered illusions about how the elite really operate. Her conviction did not close the book. If anything, it cracked it open wider. Because when someone like that falls, the first question people ask isn't just, what did she do? It's what did she know? And more importantly, who did she know it about? Over the years, names have been dragged into the orbit of that question. Billionaires, politicians, academics, royals, celebrities, some backed by documents, some by testimony, some by photographs, some by rumor alone. And among those names, one stands out not because of evidence presented in court, but because of the sheer volatility of the public reaction when it's mentioned. Meghan Markle. To some, she is a symbol of modernity. To others, a disruptor. To others still, a carefully constructed image with inconvenient chapters left out. And that's where this story gets dangerous. Because when you combine a woman the world argues about with a scandal the world can't forget, you don't get clarity. You get chaos. Claims begin to circulate. Allegations are repeated. Old photos are re-examined. Social media threads explode with connecting the dots. Words like yacht days start appearing. So do numbers. So do royal titles. So do accusations that, once spoken, can never fully be taken back. But here's the question most people never stop to ask. Why this story? Why now? And who actually benefits from it being told? Because outrage is profitable. Suspicion is contagious. And ambiguity is the perfect breeding ground for belief. The internet doesn't need proof. It needs plausibility. And plausibility is built through pattern recognition, through repetition, through the suggestion that where there is smoke, there must be fire. But history shows us something far more unsettling. Sometimes there is smoke because someone wants there to be smoke. So before we go any further, something needs to be clear. What you are about to hear is not a declaration of facts. It is an exploration of allegations, public records, media narratives, and the psychological machinery that turns speculation into assumed truth. This matters because reputations are destroyed long before courts ever speak. And silence, in this ecosystem, is often interpreted as guilt. So let's slow down. Let's rewind. Before Duchess, before royalty, before global fame, there was a woman trying to break into Hollywood. Meghan Markle was not born into power. She did not arrive with a famous last name or an inherited fortune. She arrived like thousands of others do, with auditions, side jobs, networking, and a determination that people either admire or deeply resent. Hollywood is a city built on access, on who you know, on who opens doors, on who invites you into rooms that never appear on IMDb. And that's where the mythology begins. Because Hollywood has always had its rumors, its whispered pathways to success, its uncomfortable truths that people pretend no longer exist. Yachts, private parties, exclusive guest lists, connections that can't be proven but are endlessly discussed. Most people dismiss these stories outright. Others insist they are the industry's worst-kept secret. The truth, as usual, sits somewhere in between. Not every rumor is real. Not every success is earned cleanly. Not every accusation is false. And not every silence is accidental. Which brings us back to Ghislaine Maxwell. Her documented role in elite social circles is not disputed. Her proximity to power is not speculation. What remains contested is how far that power extended and who it touched. And here's where narratives begin to intertwine. Because when the public learned that Maxwell was allegedly a facilitator, a connector, someone who curated access, people naturally began asking, access to whom? And when royal names had already been linked, through verified reporting, to the broader Epstein scandal, the ground was already primed. Enter Prince Andrew. His association with Jeffrey Epstein is not a rumor. It is a matter of public record. Interviews were given. Explanations were attempted. Public trust collapsed. And once one royal figure is implicated in scandal, the monarchy itself becomes a magnet for speculation. That's how ecosystems of belief work. One confirmed connection becomes a doorway through which countless unconfirmed stories rush in. Suddenly, every interaction is reinterpreted. Every photograph is suspicious. Every timeline is scrutinized. And in that environment, a woman who later married into the royal family becomes a perfect vessel for projection. Ask yourself this honestly. If Meghan Markle were a private citizen, would these stories carry the same weight? Or is it the crown that electrifies them? Because power attracts narratives the way gravity attracts matter. And the internet loves a fall-from-grace story. It loves contradictions. It loves the idea that behind polished speeches and humanitarian branding lies a darker truth. But here's the contradiction that rarely gets discussed. If these allegations were truly explosive, why haven't they surfaced in court? If they were verifiable, why haven't journalists with far more resources confirmed them? And if they are untrue, why do they refuse to die? This is where things get uncomfortable. Because stories don't survive on truth alone. They survive on emotional usefulness. They survive because they satisfy something in the audience. Suspicion, resentment, a desire to believe that no one truly escapes the dirt. And they survive because they are almost impossible to disprove. How do you prove you were not on a yacht? How do you disprove a number spoken without context? How do you defend yourself against something framed as people are saying? This is the trap. And Ghislaine Maxwell, whether intentionally or not, sits at the center of it. Her silence fuels speculation. Her imprisonment amplifies her mystique. The idea that she knows more than she will ever say becomes more powerful than any statement she could make. And into that vacuum, narratives rush in. Some sincere, some malicious, some opportunistic, some born entirely online. Which brings us to the most dangerous part of this story. Once an allegation enters the cultural bloodstream, it stops belonging to facts. It becomes a weapon, a distraction, a bargaining chip, a warning shot, and sometimes a smokescreen. So as we move forward, ask yourself something. Are we uncovering hidden truths? Or are we watching how power, fame, and scandal are recycled into entertainment? Because the line between investigation and exploitation is thinner than most people want to admit. And the next chapter takes us deeper into a world where access is currency, rumors are leverage, and yachts are never just yachts. Because what came next, according to those who claim to understand this world, would change everything. And no one saw it coming. What if the person the world saw wasn't the person who existed behind closed doors? Before Meghan Markle was a duchess, before headlines followed her across continents, before every move was dissected by tabloids and social media, she was a young actress navigating a city built on illusion, ambition, and whispered promises. Los Angeles is a place that looks glamorous in magazines, but in reality, it's a maze of competition, rejection, and invisible hierarchies. One moment you're auditioning for a small role in a coffee shop scene. The next, a rumor can skyrocket you, or bury you entirely. Meghan arrived in Hollywood armed with nothing but her talent, her charm, and an ambition that some would later call audacity. She didn't have a famous last name, a powerful family, or a network ready to open doors. Everything had to be earned, negotiated, and sometimes painfully navigated in secrecy. In this city, access is everything, An opportunity is rarely earned through merit alone. Sometimes it is offered, and sometimes it is withheld, with unspoken rules that newcomers rarely understand. Think about it. Every aspiring actor is taught the same lessons. Learn your lines, network, be likable, and above all, be invisible to the wrong people. But Hollywood is also a city of whispers. Rumors travel faster than scripts. Names stick to headlines whether they belong there or not. And in this environment, some young women discovered that doors only opened when someone else, someone powerful, gave them the key. It's in that context that Maxwell's name begins to surface. Even in the mid-2000s, she had already built a reputation for controlling access. Some called her a social gatekeeper. Others said she curated the right parties, the right yachts, the right connections. For the uninitiated, she was just another socialite. For those inside the network, she was indispensable. Imagine being in that world. You are ambitious. You are talented. You are hungry. And someone whispers that attending the right events, on yachts, at private residences, or in exclusive social clubs, could accelerate your career. No contracts. No guarantees. Just opportunity wrapped in ambiguity. This is where the mythology of yacht days begins. Not as a proven fact, but as a narrative that fascinates and horrifies in equal measure. Because yachts, in elite social lore, are not just boats. They are stages. Places where boundaries blur, where powerful men and women mingle, where influence is exchanged silently and decisively. In Hollywood, such stories are whispered with awe. Outside Hollywood, they are sensationalized. And the internet never forgets either version. Meghan's early career included guest roles on shows like Fringe and recurring appearances in legal dramas, roles that paid the bills but didn't guarantee stardom. She had to navigate auditions, managers, and an industry where fame could arrive suddenly or vanish without explanation. She had to learn the rhythm of power and influence, even if she didn't fully understand it yet. And that's when the connections began to matter. Not the ones in the casting office or on screen, but the ones whispered about in magazines, tabloids, and elite gossip circles. These networks were invisible to most people, but everyone who mattered knew they existed. Access, it seemed, could be purchased, borrowed, or granted, but it could never be demanded. The emotional toll of this environment is difficult to overstate. A young woman in this world must balance ambition with caution. Every choice is scrutinized. Every photo, every social media post, every public appearance becomes a potential story. Sometimes those stories are accurate. Often, they are not. But once a rumor exists, it doesn't matter whether it is true. It matters whether people believe it. And belief can be more dangerous than fact. Because once the public attaches a narrative to someone, it becomes nearly impossible to separate the person from the story. This is the double bind Meghan found herself in. A woman attempting to define herself in a city where power is invisible and stories are more permanent than reputations. Meanwhile, Ghislaine Maxwell operated in the spaces most outsiders could never enter. Her influence was quiet but formidable. She didn't announce herself on red carpets. She didn't post every encounter on social media. Instead, she built relationships, curated connections, and controlled access. Those who entered her orbit understood her power. Even if it was never articulated explicitly, it's in these shadows that the first alleged connections between Maxwell, celebrities, and powerful social figures began to form. Stories circulate in whispers, names on guest lists, yachts anchored off exclusive islands, events that supposedly brought together Hollywood, royalty, and international elites. Few can verify them, yet the stories persist. Part of that persistence comes from human nature. The allure of secrecy, the thrill of forbidden knowledge, the satisfaction of imagining the invisible threads connecting the powerful. For Meghan, the challenge was even greater. Hollywood offered visibility and opportunity, but it also exposed her to speculation, rumor, and scrutiny. Even minor associations could be exaggerated. Invitations to events could be interpreted in multiple ways. A photograph at a party could be taken as proof of a connection that never existed. And when stories are repeated often enough, they begin to take on a life of their own. It's worth pausing here to consider the psychological pressure. Imagine living every day with the possibility that everything you do could be misinterpreted, that your choices, even private ones, could become public currency in a game you didn't choose to play. Every smile could be dissected. Every friendship could be questioned. Every success could be attributed to someone else's influence. And then, imagine a figure like Maxwell in that ecosystem. A gatekeeper, a connector, someone whose name alone carried weight. The idea that she could grant, or withhold, access to opportunities, parties, and influential circles created both fear and fascination. To be associated with her, even tangentially, became a form of validation. To be excluded could feel like erasure. This dynamic is crucial to understand because it sets the stage for the broader narrative that would later emerge. It's not just about yachts or Hollywood parties or even alleged misconduct. It's about perception, power, and the way rumors exploit both. Every story needs a pivot, and for Meghan, that pivot came with visibility, ambition, and the growing public scrutiny of her personal life. The media began to cover her more extensively. Paparazzi photographs became routine. Her relationships were dissected, and as her profile rose, the potential for rumors and allegations increased exponentially. The world often forgets the fragile, formative years of public figures. They are treated as fully formed celebrities, judged by a standard that assumes omniscience and control. In reality, those early years are often chaotic, uncertain, and defined as much by luck as by skill. For Meghan, navigating that chaos required resilience, strategy, and a careful balancing act between ambition and privacy. And yet, the stories persisted. Allegations about parties, yachts, and access granted circulated quietly, only to resurface in sensationalized form when her profile grew even larger. Some of these stories were entirely unsubstantiated. Others were based on fragments of truth, distorted by memory, repetition, or imagination. But repetition made them credible in the eyes of many. This is the world at the center of the storm. A young woman, ambitious and talented, navigating a city and a network that prizes secrecy, connection, and power. A woman whose rise would later be scrutinized through a lens clouded by rumor, speculation, and cultural obsession with royalty. A woman whose every move would be interpreted, misinterpreted, or weaponized. And then came Maxwell's name, whispered alongside hers in forums, articles, and social media threads. The connection was never verified publicly. Yet the idea that such a gatekeeper existed, someone capable of opening doors to elites, added a layer of tension to the narrative. Was it mentorship, influence, or something darker? The line between help and manipulation, ambition and exploitation, became impossible to define with certainty. As viewers, we are left with questions, not answers. Questions about access, questions about ambition, questions about the invisible rules that govern elite social circles. And, perhaps most unsettlingly, questions about how power shapes narrative. What happens when rumor becomes reality in the public mind? What happens when allegations circulate faster than verification? And what happens when one person, quietly powerful, can shape who enters and who remains outside the most exclusive circles? These questions frame everything that follows. They set the stage for a narrative where yachts, parties, and alleged misconduct intersect with ambition, fame, and royalty. They remind us that perception often outweighs fact, and they force us to confront the uncomfortable truth. In a world governed by secrecy, even the innocent can be swept up in allegations they cannot control. And just as the storm begins to gather around this young woman's life, one question rises above all others. Who else is watching, and what are they willing to do with what they know? Because what comes next is not just about Hollywood, not just about ambition, not just about fame. It is about networks of influence, allegations that refuse to die, and the way power is exercised quietly, invisibly, and relentlessly. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Imagine a place where the sun glints off the water, champagne flows freely, and the skyline disappears behind a private horizon. Yachts are not just boats. They are floating microcosms of wealth, influence, and power. They are stages where the elite perform for one another, where opportunities are whispered, alliances are tested, and reputations are quietly built or destroyed. To outsiders, they appear glamorous, almost mythical. To those who move in these circles, They are a currency of access, a way to measure who belongs and who doesn't. The very word, yacht, evokes exclusivity. It conjures images of private invitations, curated guest lists, and events so secretive that the media can't touch them. But there is another layer, one less glamorous, more insidious. In these circles, power is not just about what you say or do. It's about where you are allowed to be, who you are allowed to meet, and what doors remain firmly closed. A single invitation can alter trajectories. A single omission can erase a name from opportunity entirely. In Hollywood and elite social spaces, rumors about such gatherings have circulated for decades. Parties on yachts are said to bring together celebrities, models, entrepreneurs, royals, and financiers in a setting that blurs lines between work and pleasure, ambition and indulgence. These are gatherings where influence is exchanged in subtle ways. A compliment, a toast, a fleeting introduction. What outsiders perceive as indulgence is, in many ways, a complex social negotiation. Allegations about yacht days have followed several high-profile figures. The details often come from fragments, second-hand accounts, unverified claims, court testimony, and occasional leaks in media outlets. Every story carries the same hallmarks: exclusivity, secrecy, and the presence of powerful individuals whose names make the narrative magnetic. The very absence of verification only increases the intrigue. People assume that if it's so secret, it must be true, or at least plausible. Consider the power dynamics at play. A young actress in Los Angeles is learning quickly. A career can hinge on who you meet in private, not just who you perform in front of on camera. Someone like Maxwell, whose role is allegedly that of a facilitator, controls the invitations, the networks, and the introductions. This is where perception and influence collide. Access is not just physical, it is psychological. Being invited signals approval, while exclusion signals judgment or disfavor. Models, actors, and socialites who attend these gatherings are navigating an unspoken code. Appear confident, smile politely, engage selectively, never overstep, never broadcast what happens. Those who break the code can find themselves subtly ostracized or erased from opportunity. The rules are unwritten but fiercely enforced. Success, in this world, is measured not just in roles or contracts, but in inclusion and association. Allegations regarding Meghan Markle's yacht days often surface in discussions alongside Maxwell. Some claim that she was present in these circles in the mid to late 2000s, interacting with influential figures and navigating the same networks that others in Hollywood and international socialite circles frequented. What is critical here is to distinguish between confirmed events and narrative speculation. Few public records exist, but the stories persist in online forums, social media threads, and sensationalized reporting. The human brain has a tendency to fill gaps. When specific details are missing, people often infer connections, motives, and behaviors. This is why the combination of yachts, models, and exclusive parties becomes fertile ground for speculation. Even the absence of direct evidence can be interpreted as a sign of secrecy or concealment. And in the court of public opinion, perception often outweighs verification. Consider the role of power in these gatherings. The powerful do not always need to speak to exert influence. Their presence alone signals status and potential opportunity. For young women navigating Hollywood or elite social circles, recognition by someone like Maxwell or another influential figure can feel like a lifeline. Acceptance validates. Exclusion punishes. Allegations about yachts are not merely about leisure. They are about access, hierarchy, and the subtle, persistent exercise of influence. Moreover, these spaces are gendered and hierarchical. Women are often evaluated not only for talent, but also for perceived social intelligence, attractiveness, and conformity to unspoken expectations. Men wield influence, sometimes overtly, often subtly. In these microcosms, rumors about misconduct or coercion can intertwine with stories of career advancement, creating an environment where it becomes difficult to disentangle ambition from exploitation, opportunity from manipulation. It is important to highlight that allegations surrounding these events are complex. There is no public verification for specific encounters or detailed interactions. What exists are patterns, claims, and cultural narratives that feed into broader stories about power, influence, and secrecy. Allegations persist because they resonate emotionally. They appeal to curiosity, outrage, and the innate human interest in forbidden knowledge. The internet amplifies this effect. Once a story is repeated, dissected, and shared across multiple platforms, it gains momentum. Memes, forum posts, and video analyses reinforce the narrative. Even when disputed, the repetition strengthens public perception. This is the paradox. The more a claim is investigated, dissected, or denied, the more it persists in collective consciousness. But yachts are only the surface. They are the setting for a much more intricate network of interactions. At the center of this network is Maxwell, allegedly a figure who not only curated attendance, but also mediated introductions, managed reputations, and controlled social access. The exact extent of her influence is impossible to measure definitively. What is clear is that her proximity to wealth and power made her name carry weight wherever she moved. In these networks, control is subtle. A name on a guest list, a nod of approval, a private introduction. All of these are transactions of social capital. They shape careers, reputations, and sometimes personal safety. For an ambitious young actress like Meghan Markle, navigating these waters, both literal and figurative, would require extraordinary awareness. Every decision, every interaction, could have long-term implications, whether recognized at the time or not. Rumors, speculation, and media interest often exaggerate these dynamics, presenting them as more scandalous or dramatic than reality might support. Yet the emotional power of the stories remains undeniable. Audiences are captivated because they perceive stakes, fame, influence, and power, intersecting with secrecy and danger. This creates a compelling narrative, one that persists long after the events themselves. And so, yachts become a symbol, not just of leisure, not just of wealth, but of the hidden rules of elite networks. They represent a world where access is everything, where social dynamics are invisible but potent, and where reputations are built or destroyed quietly, far from the public eye. The question that emerges from all of this is inevitable. If someone is alleged to have been present, what did they witness? What choices did they make? And what might they have carried forward, intentionally or unintentionally, into their later lives, careers, and public identities? The story does not end with yachts. It expands outward, connecting to broader networks, whispered allegations, and the people who allegedly controlled access to some of the most influential individuals in the world. Maxwell's name, again, appears as a pivot point. Whether she actively facilitated, merely observed, or occupied some combination of the two is debated endlessly, but her reputation ensures the narrative continues. And here is the emotional tension, the allure of the unknown. What happened on these yachts, in these private spaces, remains largely invisible. The stories are fragmented. The evidence is scarce. Yet the speculation is relentless. It persists because the gaps invite imagination. It persists because the power dynamics resonate. And it persists because the stakes, ambition, reputation, survival, are universally understood. So as we move forward, it's essential to recognize that these allegations, whether proven, disproven, or unresolved, serve a function. They illuminate a world most people never see. They demonstrate how access can define opportunity. And they reveal the precarious position of anyone navigating networks where visibility, influence, and rumor intersect in unpredictable ways. And just as the currents of these yacht stories swirl outward, connecting Hollywood, socialites, and royalty, one question lingers. Who really controls the narrative? Because in a world built on perception and secrecy, control is everything. But what came next would challenge everything Meghan thought she understood about ambition, power, and survival, and it would pull her into circles where the rules were unwritten, the stakes were enormous, and no one could be trusted. Imagine a world where knowing the right people matters more than talent. A world where doors only open if someone with influence decides to unlock them. In this world, the most powerful figure may not be the one who appears on magazine covers, gives speeches, or attends galas. It could be the one who decides who gets in and who doesn't. That is where Ghislaine Maxwell exists in the narrative, a gatekeeper, a curator, a woman whose influence was invisible but formidable. Maxwell's name first became public knowledge for many people through the lens of scandal, but even before that, she occupied a unique position in elite social networks. Daughter of Robert Maxwell, a media mogul with immense resources and global influence, Ghislaine grew up surrounded by wealth, status, and the mechanics of power. Her father's sudden death did not diminish her capacity to navigate elite circles. Instead, it arguably enhanced it. She learned early how connections work, how influence is exercised quietly, and how to operate behind the scenes. Her reputation as a connector was built quietly over years. Celebrities, business leaders, and political figures reportedly sought her guidance, introductions, and social validation. Some admired her, others feared her. Yet few questioned her ability to control access. She curated events, managed guest lists, and, according to public reporting and court documents, could shape social ecosystems with subtlety and precision. To understand her influence, it helps to think in terms of networks. Maxwell was not always the most visible person in the room, but she often determined who would be visible. Attendance at the right party, a private dinner, or a yacht gathering often depended on her approval or her facilitation. In social and professional hierarchies, such control can be more powerful than wealth or fame itself. Now, consider the implications. A young actress trying to navigate Hollywood, a rising socialite seeking recognition, or even someone entering elite social circles internationally. Maxwell's approval could open doors that would otherwise remain closed. Access is not always transactional in the literal sense, but it is transactional in effect. Being in the right room can lead to auditions, roles, partnerships, or sponsorships. Being excluded can feel like erasure. Maxwell's alleged role as a gatekeeper became a central component in the narrative surrounding yachts, models, and elite gatherings. She was the pivot point, the one whose presence, influence, or approval could legitimize attendance at gatherings that were otherwise off-limits. For those navigating these circles, her name carried weight. For outsiders, the very idea of someone having that kind of invisible power was both fascinating and terrifying. Allegations surrounding Maxwell often intersect with speculation about who attended her gatherings and under what circumstances. While much remains unverified, court records, investigative journalism, and media reports suggest that her social influence was broad, touching Hollywood, European aristocracy, and financial elites. This creates a scenario where stories about access, influence, and opportunity intertwine with rumors, speculation, and partially documented events. The psychological dimension is critical. For anyone trying to enter these circles, the presence of a figure like Maxwell is both an opportunity and a threat. Approval promises possibility. Exclusion threatens stagnation. In a world where reputation and visibility dictate career trajectories, the stakes are high. Young women in particular must navigate the subtle expectations, power dynamics, and social hierarchies that Maxwell allegedly managed. Every smile, every interaction, every handshake may carry meaning. Every misstep may be noted and remembered. Consider the example of a hypothetical event on a yacht. Invitations are whispered. Attendees are carefully selected. Those present understand that their behavior, appearance, and discretion are all being evaluated. Maxwell's presence adds an additional layer, a gatekeeper watching, connecting, and possibly controlling the flow of influence. Who is allowed to sit near whom? Who is introduced to the most powerful guests? These are not idle concerns. They can determine the trajectory of a career, the formation of alliances, or the exposure to risk. This dynamic creates tension. On one hand, it offers opportunity. On the other, it imposes constant scrutiny. For individuals like Meghan Markle, entering Hollywood and social networks at the same time that Maxwell operated in these spheres, the environment could be both enticing and dangerous. Even without direct interaction, the knowledge that such gatekeepers exist shapes behavior, decisions, and perception. It is worth emphasizing, Maxwell's influence does not automatically imply wrongdoing. Influence in elite circles is often exercised in opaque ways. Approval, introductions, and social validation are standard currency. The challenge arises in interpreting how that influence was applied, and in evaluating allegations, testimony, and speculation that attach themselves to her name. In some cases, the lines between mentorship, networking, coercion, and exploitation become blurred, creating narratives that are difficult to verify but emotionally compelling. Maxwell's story is intertwined with broader allegations that emerged from the Epstein scandal. Her connections, her proximity to powerful individuals, and her role in orchestrating social gatherings placed her in a spotlight she may never have anticipated. Yet even before her legal troubles, her name carried weight. She was known, feared, and respected in elite social circles. To be associated with her, even briefly, could enhance credibility or invite scrutiny. This is where the narrative begins to converge. Maxwell as gatekeeper, Yacht as arenas of influence, and Meghan as a young woman navigating networks of power, all intersect in a story that mixes documented events, rumors, and speculation. The challenge is understanding the mechanics of influence without conflating influence with misconduct. Maxwell's ability to control access illustrates the broader dynamics of power, hierarchy, and opportunity. Stories about yachts, parties, and elite gatherings persist because of human psychology. People are drawn to secrecy, fascination, and the perception of power. The more invisible the gatekeeper, the more intriguing the narrative. Maxwell's invisibility allowed her name to gain mystique. The allegations attached to her name, whether true, false, or partially accurate, resonate because they speak to the universal tension between opportunity and vulnerability, ambition and control. As the story develops, Maxwell's alleged influence becomes more than social. It becomes symbolic. She represents the invisible structures through which power is exercised, decisions are made, and access is determined. For the ambitious, her approval is golden. For the wary, her presence is intimidating. For the public, she is a figure at once alluring and terrifying, enigmatic and central to the unfolding drama. This dynamic sets the stage for what comes next. The intersection of Hollywood, social networks, yachts, and royalty. Maxwell is the pivot. She is the one through whom connections, real or alleged, are filtered. Her influence shapes narratives before they reach the public. Her discretion, or the lack thereof, creates stories that persist, evolve, and gain traction over time. And as we move forward, it's essential to remember, power rarely announces itself. Maxwell's role was not always public, and yet her effect was undeniable. To understand the narratives surrounding yacht gatherings, social influence, and elite networks, we must first understand the gatekeeper, the woman at the center who could open doors, grant access, and control perception in ways most people could not imagine. But just as Maxwell's presence commands attention, it also invites speculation. How much of the narrative is shaped by verified events, and how much by conjecture? How do stories about influence transform into allegations of misconduct? And perhaps most crucially, who benefits from repeating these stories, whether true or false? The answers are not simple. They involve layers of psychology, power, ambition, and media dynamics. They involve understanding networks, hierarchy, and human behavior in extreme social contexts. And they set the stage for one of the most contentious intersections in recent cultural history, the intersection of Maxwell, elite gatherings, and the rising profile of Meghan Markle. What comes next will explore this intersection further, diving into the world of royalty, rumors, and the explosive claims that have captivated public attention for years. Because once a gatekeeper like Maxwell is involved, the rules change. The stakes are higher, and the consequences, real or imagined, can ripple across continents. But what came next would challenge perceptions, push narratives to the breaking point, and bring powerful figures into the spotlight in ways no one anticipated. Imagine standing at the edge of the world's most scrutinized institution, the British monarchy. Every gesture, every word, every public appearance is examined under a microscope. Now imagine someone attempting to navigate that orbit as an outsider, a woman whose life, choices, and ambitions suddenly intersect with centuries of tradition, hierarchy, and relentless public attention. That is the context in which Meghan Markle's story intersects with a royal world that is both dazzling and perilous. The British royal family operates under rules most people never see. They are guided by centuries of precedent, ceremonial obligation, and a strict hierarchy that dictates behavior, access, and loyalty. At first glance, it is a world of privilege and influence. But for those entering it, particularly as outsiders, it is also a world of intense scrutiny, rigid expectation, and invisible tests. The public sees ceremonies and photo ops. The insiders experience protocol, politics, and constant evaluation. For Meghan, entering this orbit meant negotiating two overlapping realities: her life as a public figure in Hollywood and her life as a soon-to-be member of the royal family. Both worlds are governed by influence, reputation, and perception, but the rules differ dramatically. Hollywood rewards visibility, charisma, and networking. The monarchy values discretion, adherence to tradition, and alignment with institutional priorities. A misstep in either can have repercussions that extend far beyond what most people can imagine. It is within this intersection that rumors, speculation, and unverified narratives begin to take hold. Royalty has long been a magnet for stories of scandal, intrigue, and rumor. From historical tabloid accounts of royal affairs to modern social media speculation, the public fascination with the private lives of royals is relentless. When combined with someone like Maxwell, already associated with influence in elite networks, the narratives surrounding yachts, introductions, and social gatherings take on an added weight. Consider the psychological pressure. Meghan, as an outsider, had to contend with centuries of institutional expectation. Every friendship, every alliance, and every association became fodder for speculation. When whispers of yacht gatherings or elite parties entered the public imagination, they were interpreted not only as social activities, but also as potential gateways to power or scandal. Even allegations based on fragments of truth could become magnified in this environment. Royal proximity is itself a form of currency. Being seen with certain figures, attending specific events, or gaining the approval of gatekeepers can elevate one's status immeasurably. But with that proximity comes risk. Misinterpretation, rumor, or malicious intent can quickly turn an opportunity into a crisis. For Meghan, navigating these waters required a delicate balance between visibility and caution, between connection and independence. The media plays an outsized role in this dynamic. Every photograph, statement, or public appearance is dissected and recontextualized. Stories about alleged yacht gatherings or connections with influential figures spread rapidly, often blending verified facts with speculation. Social media amplifies these narratives, creating echo chambers where repetition reinforces belief. For members of the royal orbit, controlling perception becomes as important as controlling access. And then there are the allegations themselves, the very nature of the claims. Attending exclusive parties, being present on yachts, interacting with powerful figures, invites scrutiny and debate. Some reports are based on first-hand testimony, some on investigative journalism, some on rumor. Separating fact from conjecture is nearly impossible for outsiders, yet the emotional impact is profound. Once a narrative enters the public sphere, it shapes perception regardless of verification. It is in this context that Maxwell's alleged influence becomes significant. Her ability to curate access, manage guest lists, and facilitate introductions intersects with the monarchy's inherently hierarchical and opaque structure. For those observing from the outside, this creates a narrative in which power, secrecy, and influence collide. Every association is interpreted as a potential connection. Every invitation becomes a symbol. Every absence becomes a question. The stakes extend beyond personal reputation. In royal circles, missteps can have institutional consequences. Protocols dictate behavior, alliances affect influence, and public perception impacts the monarchy's image. For outsiders like Meghan, these stakes are amplified. Navigating rumors, unverified claims, and the constant attention of the public and media creates a high-pressure environment where every action is analyzed and every story has ramifications. Psychologically, this environment can be destabilizing. The combination of visibility, scrutiny, and rumor creates constant tension. Social relationships are carefully managed. Communication is controlled. Decisions are made with foresight into how they may be perceived. The uncertainty inherent in such an environment can create anxiety, hypervigilance, and a sense of isolation. For someone navigating both Hollywood and royal expectations, the pressure multiplies. Consider also the role of timing. Many of the allegations and rumors that surface about yachts and exclusive gatherings predate Meghan's royal involvement. Yet as her profile increased, these narratives were revisited, reframed, and amplified. The public often interprets historical associations through the lens of current prominence, which can distort perception and heighten controversy. This phenomenon illustrates how timing, visibility, and social prominence shape the life cycle of rumors and allegations. The combination of Maxwell's alleged influence, the secrecy of elite gatherings, and the heightened scrutiny of the royal orbit creates a potent narrative environment. It is one in which association itself can be interpreted as influence, access, or implication. The line between opportunity and exposure, between networking and scandal, becomes blurred. And once a story gains traction, the interplay of media, rumor, and public fascination ensures its persistence. Allegations tied to royal proximity are further complicated by legal, institutional, and cultural factors. Royals often operate under rules of non-disclosure, strategic communication, and reputation management. Outsiders may misinterpret silence, discretion, or protocol as avoidance or complicity. Meanwhile, the public and media fill gaps with conjecture, pattern recognition, and speculation, often producing narratives that gain life independent of verification. This is the environment in which Yacht's stories, elite gatherings, and Maxwell's alleged role intersect with Meghan Markle. Each element reinforces the others. Secrecy magnifies speculation, high-profile association amplifies attention, and public fascination ensures repetition. The result is a story that is as compelling as it is complex, one that mixes confirmed events, unverified claims, and cultural obsession into a narrative that persists over time. And yet, for all the speculation, it is critical to remember, the monarchy operates according to its own set of rules, protocols, and hierarchies. The public sees only a fraction of the interactions, decisions, and dynamics that define royal life. Allegations and rumors often reflect perception more than reality, yet they carry real consequences for those involved. The interplay between private behavior, public image, and media interpretation creates a landscape in which clarity is rare and speculation thrives. The tension escalates when we consider the individuals allegedly at the center of these overlapping networks. Meghan Markle, a rising actress and socialite, enters a world of rigid hierarchy, extreme scrutiny, and intricate social expectations. Ghislaine Maxwell, a gatekeeper with influence in elite social circles, operates quietly but effectively, shaping access and perceptions. And the monarchy, with centuries of tradition and public oversight, provides a backdrop in which every action and association is magnified. It is at this intersection, between Hollywood ambition, elite social influence, and royal protocol, that narratives gain momentum. Every alleged yacht gathering, every whispered introduction, every speculation about access or approval becomes a thread in a larger tapestry. The public, the media, and online forums weave these threads into narratives that blend fact, fiction, and conjecture, creating stories that persist and evolve over time. And as the orbit of these narratives expands, so too does the tension. Questions multiply. Who is involved? What really happened? How do rumors spread? And why do they endure? How much influence does a gatekeeper like Maxwell exert? And how does it intersect with institutions like the monarchy? How does public fascination amplify speculation? And what is the cost to the individuals at the center of these stories? The answers are elusive, but the narrative pressure is real. For Meghan, navigating these dynamics requires constant awareness, strategic decision-making, and careful management of public perception. For the public and media, it fuels fascination, debate, and speculation. And for Maxwell, the alleged influence she wields continues to shape perception, whether through direct action, association, or the mystique of her reputation. But the most consequential question remains: how does this swirling nexus of power, rumor, and social hierarchy translate into the explosive allegations that would later capture global attention? Because once elite social networks, gatekeepers, and royal scrutiny converge, the resulting narratives are more than just gossip. They become cultural phenomena that can define public perception for years. And as the story deepens, one of the most contentious figures in recent history emerges into view. A royal whose associations, behaviors, and alleged interactions would ignite debate, scrutiny, and speculation on a scale few could have anticipated. But what came next would take these overlapping networks, rumors, and public fascination and push them into the kind of controversy that dominates headlines and history in ways no one foresaw. Few names ignite controversy quite like Prince Andrew. A figure born into privilege, bound by centuries of monarchy, and placed under relentless public scrutiny, his actions have long been analyzed, criticized, and sensationalized. To understand the web of speculation surrounding Meghan Markle, Ghislaine Maxwell, and elite social circles, it is essential to examine how Andrew's history intersects with allegations, public perception, and the dynamics of influence. Prince Andrew's association with Jeffrey Epstein is well documented and forms the backbone of much public discourse about scandal within elite networks. Interviews, court filings, and media investigations have established connections that cannot be ignored. While Andrew has repeatedly denied wrongdoing, the mere existence of these connections has created an enduring public fascination and intense scrutiny, both of which ripple through broader narratives about power, access, and elite gatherings. The psychological dimension is significant. Royals are not only symbols, they are individuals navigating roles laden with centuries of expectation. Every association carries weight. Every rumor can amplify, distort, or define public perception. In Andrew's case, his links to Epstein created a scenario in which proximity to scandal became inseparable from his public persona. This is critical for understanding why narratives about other figures in elite social networks, Maxwell, Meghan, and others, gain traction when royal connections are invoked. Consider the public reaction. When high-profile names are mentioned in connection with scandal, media coverage escalates rapidly. Social media explodes with speculation. Online forums dissect every public appearance, past photograph, or social encounter. The public often conflates correlation with causation, interpreting proximity as complicity or endorsement. The result is a feedback loop. Rumor fuels media, media fuels speculation, and speculation solidifies into perceived truth, regardless of legal outcomes. This is where the 13 times allegation comes into play. Numbers in these narratives, especially repeated numbers, carry symbolic weight. Whether verified or not, they suggest pattern, intention, and repeated behavior. For the public, they amplify the emotional intensity of the story, creating outrage, fascination, and disbelief. Yet, in the absence of independent verification, such claims exist primarily as narrative devices, powerful, viral, and difficult to disprove. The intersection of Andrew's public scrutiny and Maxwell's alleged gatekeeping role magnifies perception. Maxwell's influence in elite social circles, combined with Andrew's established controversies, creates fertile ground for speculation. The human mind naturally seeks connections between known facts and rumor. If Maxwell allegedly facilitated access to elite gatherings, and Andrew is a figure tied to scandal, then the narrative threads weave together into a story that appears plausible, even if much remains unverified. Meghan Markle's involvement in this context becomes even more scrutinized. As a rising actress, a socialite, and later a royal, her associations are evaluated through multiple lenses: media narratives, public opinion, and the historical scrutiny applied to anyone linked, however tangentially, to scandal. The juxtaposition of her Hollywood trajectory with Andrew's controversial orbit invites speculation, reinterpretation, and, inevitably, rumor amplification. Psychologically, the stakes are enormous. Public perception can override nuance, turning allegation into assumed truth. For those inside these networks, understanding who controls access, who communicates information, and who observes interactions is as important as any formal agreement or contract. The emotional pressure of navigating such networks, where rumors can define reputation, cannot be understated. It is also important to consider the role of repetition. In journalism, social media, and cultural storytelling, repeated claims gain credibility over time. A story mentioned once may be dismissed. Repeated across platforms, it gains a life of its own. The combination of Andrew's notoriety, Maxwell's alleged influence, and Meghan's rising profile ensures that narratives surrounding yacht gatherings, elite parties, and alleged interactions persist, evolve, and captivate public attention. From a sociological perspective, this illustrates a broader phenomenon. Elite networks are insulated yet highly visible, secretive yet relentlessly scrutinized. When scandal intersects with visibility, the outcome is not just gossip, it becomes cultural currency. The public consumes, judges, and interprets these stories as reflections of broader societal norms, fears, and fascinations. The narrative around Andrew, Maxwell, and Meghan exemplifies this dynamic. Legally, the situation is complex. Allegations, court filings, and testimony exist in some cases. In others, stories remain unverified or are disputed. Yet legal proof is not the sole arbiter of public perception. Reputation is shaped equally by rumor, media framing, and narrative repetition. For Andrew, Maxwell, and anyone allegedly associated, this creates a situation where controlling the narrative is as important, and often as impossible, as defending oneself in court. The cultural impact is also profound. Public fascination with scandal, power, and elite behavior fuels consumption of media, drives online discourse, and shapes reputational outcomes. In the case of Meghan Markle, Andrew, and Maxwell, the convergence of Hollywood, royalty, and socialite networks produces a narrative ecosystem in which perception often outweighs fact, and rumor carries outsized influence. Emotionally, this creates tension and uncertainty for those involved. Each interaction, each association, is potentially scrutinized. Trust becomes transactional. Decisions are weighed not only for immediate benefit, but for potential long-term reputational consequences. The psychological cost of navigating such environments is significant, amplifying stress, vigilance, and caution. And so, the Andrew factor does more than add scandal. It magnifies every other element in the network. Maxwell's influence, yacht gatherings, and Hollywood ambitions are refracted through the prism of royal scrutiny and public fascination. The narrative becomes denser, more compelling, and more emotionally charged. Every rumor, every claim, every alleged number, like the 13 times allegation, gains symbolic and emotional resonance beyond its literal meaning. As this narrative develops, it becomes clear that we are witnessing more than individual actions. We are observing the dynamics of power, influence, and public perception in elite networks. The combination of visibility, rumor, and hierarchy ensures that stories endure, evolve, and often take on a life of their own. And just as the public grapples with allegations, numbers, and speculation, one question looms large. What truths, if any, lie beneath the swirling narratives, and what role does perception play in shaping the legacies of those involved? Because what came next would escalate the intrigue to a level that few imagined, intertwining personal ambition, scandal, and historical scrutiny in ways that would reverberate across the globe. To understand why stories about yachts, Maxwell, Meghan Markle, and Prince Andrew grip the public imagination, one must understand the machinery that amplifies them. The media. Newspapers, television, online platforms, and social media do not merely report events. They create narratives, frame controversies, and in some cases, manufacture the perception of scandal. The media thrives on drama, conflict, and emotional intensity. Audiences are drawn to stories that elicit shock, curiosity, and outrage. High-profile figures, celebrities, royals, socialites, offer endless material. Every photograph, every social encounter, and every historical connection becomes fodder for headlines. The more extraordinary or secretive the setting, yachts, private parties, elite gatherings, the more compelling the narrative. Consider how repetition works. A single report of a rumored yacht gathering may attract attention, but as multiple outlets cover it, dissecting guest lists, alleged interactions, and possible motives, the story gains momentum. Social media accelerates this process, transforming speculation into viral content. Every tweet, forum post, or video commentary amplifies the narrative, often blurring the line between fact and conjecture. Sensationalism is not new, but in the digital age, it spreads faster and wider than ever. Allegations that might once have remained confined to niche publications now circulate globally in minutes. Readers consume, comment, and share without access to verification, creating an ecosystem in which rumor thrives. In such a system, perception often outweighs verification. If the audience believes a story, it becomes real in its cultural impact. Maxwell, Meghan, and Andrew are uniquely vulnerable to this amplification. Maxwell's past associations with powerful figures create intrigue. Meghan's rise from Hollywood to royalty invites scrutiny. Andrew's controversial connections invite analysis and debate. Together, these elements form a media-perfect storm. Every claim, rumor, and speculation becomes clickable, shareable, and endlessly dissected. Emotional triggers drive consumption. Numbers, repeated events, and allegations of misconduct create tension. Claims such as 13 times associated with a high-profile figure evoke shock, disbelief, and curiosity. Media outlets, print, broadcast, and online, know this and often emphasize repetition, dramatization, and selective framing. This strategy ensures attention, engagement, and discussion, which in turn sustains the narrative cycle. The psychological effect on audiences is profound. Repetition, emotional framing, and partial evidence create a perception of credibility. People are inclined to fill gaps with assumptions, often believing the narrative even when key facts remain unverified. This process illustrates a core principle. The media does not just report, it shapes belief. Once an allegation enters public consciousness through repeated coverage, it is difficult to retract its influence, regardless of later corrections or clarifications.